Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will begin in a few minutes just to allow others to join. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Don't Be Spooked by Headless Commerce. Today, we will hear from Jamie Cairns, SVP Channel and Alliances at Fluent Commerce, Mihaela Mazzenga, SVP Technology Strategy at Valtech, and Kelly Goetsch, Chief Product Officer at commercetools. Before I hand it over, I just wanted to run through some housekeeping items. You'll see in the webinar interface a Q&A function. We encourage you to use this throughout the session should you have any questions, as we want this to be interactive and of value to you. Use the time you have with our speakers here today, and we'll address any questions at the end during Q&A. Should we not get to them all, we will be sure to follow up with the answers. And to note, we are recording this and we'll make it available to you afterwards. Without further ado, let's kick this off. First, let's define terms. There's headless, mock, composable commerce. Kelly, can you tell us what each of these terms mean and how they all fit together?
Sure. So thanks all for attending. Great to be here today with everyone. So this is a pretty common one, and I hear this a lot. So let's look at mock as an acronym. So the M is for microservices. And microservices were invented around 2007 or so by Amazon. It's widely credited. APIs for A, that's REST APIs more specifically. That was invented around 2001 by Roy Fielding. C is cloud native multi-tenant SaaS, and that's roughly 2007, again by Amazon. And H was in 2013, headless by commercetools by Dirk Horrig. So those four things together come together for the mock acronym. And headless is just a part of that, right? So that's the H in mock. And then composable commerce, so mock is more of a technology level view, right? And it's how you build these applications today and how you consume them. But composable commerce is more of a business level view. So that's if you're a buyer, if you're an enterprise buyer and you're consuming some APIs, right? How do you buy these things? And Gartner actually coined that in 2018 as a term. And the whole concept there, and it's part of a larger composable enterprise concept, is as a business, you can consume pieces, small pieces in many cases from different vendors and get exactly what you want. You can compose the experience to your customers. So I think that addresses it, right? Did I miss any of the terms? Did I miss any buzzwords?
No, I don't think so, Kelly. And of course, glad you bring up buzzwords, right? There's lots of components there, and you can, really very easily think of how daunting or scary it might be. So to that note, I think, right, there's a lot of vendors in this space, but the relationships aren't as heavy as they used to be before, right? We're not talking about, months of waiting for servers to be provisioned, and we're not talking about needing like full-blown internal, external managed services. You can literally go and, start trial accounts right now and get your hands dirty, which I definitely recommend people do, so they start to get an understanding of the power of headless. But it really requires a little bit of a pragmatic approach and realization that the world of software services has greatly matured, and a willingness to take a look and determine how that can bring value to your organization. So that said, I think while it can be daunting, an organization such as Valtech and our role within the assembly of this is very important, because we can bring together the complete solution. We understand, right, the strengths and weaknesses of both commerce and OMS and what the platforms actually offer, and we can align those with the client value drivers as well.
I think that's really important, because one of the questions that we get and we hear quite a lot is, isn't it harder to stitch all of these components together than just buy a single stack that already does everything, right? The vendors that have talked about everything being pre-integrated, and having an organization like Valtech, or a role performed by someone like Valtech or others, is that the coordinator aspect, the architect of those experiences and seeing everything talk together. I think it's incumbent on the vendors to make it easy for the components to be integrated together. And that comes to some stuff we'll talk about a little bit later on. But the analogy is a bit like my house currently. Keeping in the Halloween theme, it has been adorned with Halloween related items from all types of different genres. And it could really have done with an architect or a coordinator from Valtech to come and do it, rather than a 7-year-old boy, because I've got spiders and I've got ghouls and I've got zombies, and without somebody to coordinate the theme. And I think a theme is probably a good way to look at it. It can become a bit of a mess, right? So it's not without challenges. I think to appreciate that to do it right requires some skills, right? But those are available.
Right. No, and I think it's about focus, right? So the power of this is that we are all independently able to focus on our own expertise, right? And not be the master at all anymore, and really specialize and bring to the table what we can bring best individually. So I mentioned a little bit about, maybe some old systems that I'm sure we've all worked with in the past, Kelly. And I think multi-tenancy can maybe be also a scary topic for people. What is your input on that? What should a headless platform actually offer somebody?
Well, I sound old now, back in my day, with my finger up in the air. We had physical servers, and you'd get a physical server with 4 or 8 cores or whatever it was, and you would install an operating system, then you'd install your app server, and then you deploy your application to it. And back then, and this is still in many cases the standard operating procedure in most enterprises, that instance of that application was specific to that environment, to that server, to that company. Right? There's no concept of multi-tenancy. And a side effect of that is anytime the vendor updated the software, they had to physically ship you an update of some sort. And then you'd have to apply that update and update all of your environments. And it wasn't that long ago that in the enterprise commerce space, when you wanted an environment, and this is still the case with a lot of our competitors out there, you have to tell them, I would like a QA environment. And then they'll come back to you and say, well, how many cores do you want? And how many instances do you want? How big should the JVMs be? And the world has moved beyond that, right? That single tenancy. It's funny, I used to hire product managers directly. And one of the questions I would ask them is, what's the difference between single and multi-tenancy? Elaborate. And it was funny because I was having really good candidates who were completely bombing that question. They had no idea what I was talking about, just blank stares. And I figured it out one day. It's anyone under the age of like 28 is completely missing it. And it's just because they've grown up in a multi-tenant world. They've grown up and they've gone to university with AWS being there and available and the defaults, SaaS is really the default to these, younger folks out there. So they had no idea what single tenancy even was as a concept. And then multi-tenancy is where a vendor, and we're all multi-tenant, anyone in the Mock Alliance, but as a vendor, we are having a copy of our application that serves multiple customers at the same time. And it's the same way as like Gmail works, for example, right? You go to gmail.com, you say, I want to create an email address, right? And now all of a sudden it's there, it's instantaneously available. You don't have to call up Google and say, I'd like an instance of Gmail set up, right? It doesn't work like that. And that's why multi-tenant SaaS is so great, because now you can just spin up a project and you can do with that project as you like. And some of our customers keep the project open for 30 seconds and do a bunch of testing on it, and then they kill it. Some of our customers keep these projects open indefinitely in production as their production project. But it's really nice to be able to have that freedom and not have to call your vendor up and actually have a physical server spun up. So, yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. Multi-tenant, shared costs, lowering the economic unit cost for use and allowing folks to do those short-term tests, experiments, and so forth. But there's sometimes an objection raised, I think maybe from some of those folks that might have bombed your question, Kelly, but an objection raised nonetheless, saying, well, my business is unique and is different from the others. So if I'm in multi-tenant, doesn't that mean I'm just getting the same as everybody else? How do I become individual? How do I individualize the experience for my clients, right? So how do you address that?
I would say commerce is a commodity, and I think that's a good thing. And what I mean by that is there are many commerce platforms on the market. Increasingly, they're offering the same baseline of features. And what we offer is basically Lego blocks, building blocks, right? And we give you the tools you need to differentiate, but we're not a platform in a box that's super differentiated. What we are is a set of building blocks that you then build your differentiation on top of. And that's a really, really big difference out there, because again, we don't think there's value in you building a shopping cart or building a promotion engine or any of those things you need to do enterprise commerce these days. I think where the real value is our customers building a custom loyalty engine or a custom UI or custom mobile app, right? But what matters is they're spending their time focusing on those things. They're not spending their time focusing on building the shopping cart and having to deal with rounding errors and all of those ridiculous things that we deal with. And the other value is as a vendor, we can do everything at scale. So we're able to serve a lot of customers off the same infrastructure, and we can update everything instantaneously as well. And it's really advantageous for us to be able to do one thing and do that one thing really well and set up a process to manage it all at scale, versus having a couple hundred customers out there, each with their own set of environments that they are then trying to maintain and run on their own. That'd be a big mess for us. And it's a mess for customers. They don't want to have to manage that.
And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I was going to say that, multi-tenancy in and of itself is also not all created equal either, right? That doesn't necessarily speak right to the cloud and the elasticity that you get, which is why it's also important within the scope of what we're discussing here on scale, and what the Mock Alliance is doing is, bringing light to the vendors that are doing it in a very specific way to where we can ensure, right, that the cloud is being utilized appropriately, even within that scope. So we all know there are lots of other benefits. So if we can maybe take a benefit that we like best here in terms of, high level or high impact of going headless. And I think for me, truly that's centralization, right? The centralization of that core business logic that allows you to really, spin up new channels, new touch points, new interfaces, and you're not reinventing the wheel that whole time. So, mobile, I think, is a great example, right? If you're looking to add a mobile app, being headless to start is an incredible first step, because you're not taking the considerations, right, to recreate all of that core complexity, on a native mobile platform, ideally, right, that's centralized somewhere, and you just add mobile as another mobile interface touch point to what you're already doing. Jamie, what's one of your favorite value add benefits of going headless?
Well, thanks. I think the concept of headless, that as Kelly said, Dirk coined the term a long while back, and is not only applied to commerce today, but to other applications as well within the market ecosystem. And I think the concept of applications and the folks who build those applications really focusing on a smaller set of core capabilities than having to do the full suite, and really becoming expert in those. And one of the key aspects of that is having interoperability between those systems and making that easy, and sharing data and sharing processes. So that disassociation between the presentation layer and the services layer, but that's then continued out through the components that sit within the service layer. So between OMS and commerce, and between commerce and search and personalization, and so forth. So the benefit, I think, is that it's really forced vendors to think really hard and really execute well on that interoperability promise, because there's nowhere to hide, because you can't turn up and be a component within an ecosystem like Mark and not adhere to all the principles of it. So it's a standardization for me, and I think that really has made it easier for folks to adopt. So you don't have to be the most sophisticated development organization in the world to adopt a headless architecture, where previously that might have been a somewhat elite club. It's now much more democratized.
And for me, I think the value is lack of upgrades. And again, if you're an old school vendor, you're selling single tenant software, you have thousands and thousands of customer environments out there. You can't just deploy your change automatically. But if you are managing everything centrally and hosting this all at scale, it becomes really, really easy to roll out updates, new features, bug fixes, all sorts of things. And you can do it instantaneously at scale and in a way that is guaranteed to work because of all the regression testing that's done automatically. So it's a much more controlled environment, and that allows us as a vendor, we can push things out instantaneously. We release multiple times a day to production. And the old school way of doing it was you'd wait once a quarter, or once every 6 months, or once a year, and you'd get a big patch from your vendor, and you'd have to apply it and then do a whole bunch of messy testing and then deploy it. And that gets expensive. That's time consuming.
Sure.
I do still get a bit of a chuckle about seeing RFPs that say, which version of your software are you proposing for this?
Exactly.
Much less frequently these days, but some of them still sneak in.
Or how long for server provision, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys, I think that it's a little bit less talked about, but it's very real for me, and that is developer satisfaction. So I think that mock and a mock approach, right, is you could maybe term it a little bit bespoke, right? Even though you are utilizing already pre-built expert APIs in the cloud, but it's bringing engineering back into software engineering for me a little bit, right? Because you are applying critical thinking and creating these solutions instead of constantly working around a suite, if that makes sense. Have you guys seen an impact on developer satisfaction?
Very much. Developers don't like, the old school approach was almost being like a brain surgeon, right? These platforms had millions and millions and millions of lines of code. And because they were monolithic, the complexity was on the inside of the code base. So if you wanted to log within, send out something to a log, right? There is a very, very, very specific way of doing that. If you wanted to extend a Java method or something of that sort, there was a super prescriptive way of doing it. You had to extend this very specific class. If you wanted to change the data model, all of these things, you had to know exactly what you were doing. And what that led to is a few really productive people who knew a lot and were able to get a lot of this stuff done. But it was very much, is almost a troll mentality, right? They're going to control their own access. They're going to gatekeep who gets to work in their application, so somebody doesn't accidentally screw it up, right? But this new approach, the complexity is on the outside. Instead, you have basically the need for a plumber, because you have all these different APIs and you have events, and now you're working in a world where you're consuming data and functionality with a really nice, clean interface, whether it's an event or an API. And you're then able to do interesting things with that. And if you want to write your own standalone pricing microservice with its own API, go for it, or, whatever it happens to be. Loyalty, people build their own search all the time, which I don't recommend, but people still do. But, you have the freedom to do that. It's a lot more open of an ecosystem, and all you need to know are events and APIs. And something we say all the time at commercetools is you don't need to be a commercetools developer. You need to be a cloud developer to work with our software. And that's a big differentiator.
Yeah. So on the topic of events, right, the kind of big event on the table for commerce, of course, is order and order placement. Jamie, I think there may be a spooky myth out there that, OMS only kicks in after the order is placed. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks. It is the most common kind of misconception that we end up dispelling, because to the conversation earlier about systems being designed to share data and to interact via API with each other within this ecosystem, one of the main roles these days of an order management system is actually the management and presentation, segmentation of inventory. Certainly the management of an order after it's been placed and the orchestration of that order so that it reaches the most optimal fulfillment center is super important, and we don't dismiss that. But I think maybe by calling ourselves an order management system, or the market calling it an order management system, it misses inventory. And one of the areas is before the buy button. So really informing the presentation layer, the commerce platform, the search and personalization tools, in supply chain, the forecasting and demand planning tools with information about purchase intent. So really being able to track what consumers are doing on the mobile app, on the site, on the kiosk, during that pre-purchase behavior. So I think it's both an example of kind of a myth around order management, but also the incumbency on these systems to be able to add value to each other. So it's okay, and I think it's the right thing to say, we compartmentalize ourselves within a particular box, and that's what we focus on. But we're also very aware that we are not the universe. We need to empower and interact with lots of other systems, so that the architects that Valtech and others bring together, and our clients bring together, are able to very easily tap into the strengths of each individual platform and pull them together. So the myth is order management is after the buy button. More often than not, we're approached with clients who face a problem with inventory, and that's the baseline on which to build it. So it comes, I think, both from a functional capability and a requirement for order management to do that, but actually it's only really becomes real if you apply the MAC principles to it, because we're not mastering inventory. We are ingesting it, right, putting some business logic around it, and then sharing it with other systems that can consume it. And even the way that that's described, if we hadn't put the effort into making that easy, and if we didn't agree on some standards for the way in which that we can do that, it could become very complex. So it's not that you can just kind of approach this without the principles in mind.
No, absolutely. And I think even availability at scale on top of inventory, right, is a massive, right, customer facing feature that requires a lot of scale behind it, especially if you're integrating to multiple fulfillment systems and multiple inventory systems.
Yeah, and I think something that folks are likely to hear more about as we have everything as a service is real-time inventory as a service. There's a range of different applications that can consume that. It's something that we're very focused on, so I'd expect to see something around that in the future.
For sure.
So I think we have 2 questions here from the audience. Why don't we answer those, and then we'll get back to the discussion. I just want to make sure we have enough time, and if anybody has any other questions. So the first question from Sam is, can you also please talk about the importance of modern headless platforms being cloud agnostic? Some organizations may have all the services hosted in GCP and would want the commerce platform hosted in Google as well. Thank you. I can take this if nobody else wants to. It feels weird asking the question myself.
Yeah, no, I think you should take this one.
With mock-based platforms, whether it's OMS or commerce, there's a really big difference compared to legacy platforms. Legacy platforms, it really did matter where you hosted them. But with modern, it's completely different. So we, and Fluent as well, we expose APIs, and then we also publish events. So even if you're on Google, right, we could be on, I don't know, I'm just making something up. We could be on Rackspace for all you know or care. What matters is that in GCP, you can call our APIs and you can consume our events. And we as a platform are able to dump our events to Google Pub Sub. So where the data actually sits doesn't really make a difference. What matters more is latency, right? And you want to be within the same country, roughly as where you are. But we even have customers who have their front ends in Australia and their back ends in Europe, for example. So it's all over the place. But it really today, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you can call our APIs and that we can throw events to the queue of your choice. And as an aside, we actually are almost entirely based in Google. We have about 15-20% of our workload on AWS. But again, it really doesn't matter. Mihaela, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you need to take a look at and decide where it does matter, where latency matters, right? And kind of pick your structure related to that. This doesn't mean that you don't have anything to do and architect, right? That's where like the glue that really keeps this entire system together is really important. And sometimes where you pick the cloud does matter, and sometimes it doesn't. It all depends on what other strategies you have on top of that, whether you have caching between the front and the back end layer. So it's still a need, right, to think really practically about what the most important fast response pieces are to the experience for the customer, and really find the best solution to integrate those. Jamie, what about you on the OMS end?
Yeah, a little while ago there was, and there still continues to be, a bit of an arms race between the cloud providers. The big ones are all kind of seeking to assert their market dominance and compete with each other. So that's great for the market because that means they're pushing functionality forward, economic costs are coming down. But one of the key tenets of cloud, particularly as we see it in the Alliance, is that interoperability between them. So I don't need to have everything on brand A's cloud because it can work elsewhere. So actually, we've been courted by various wanting to, in inverted commas, move our application to their cloud stack. And it was an all or nothing proposition. So if you wanted to tap into any of the advanced services that they were offering, you have to have everything on their cloud. Now that over the last little while, I'd say over the last 12 months, has started to change. There's far more opening up of discrete capabilities. So there might be some advanced machine learning capability available on one cloud platform that is preferable to another. So you can start to tap into the best pieces, a bit like the Mark principles of headless commerce, right? And you can tap into the best components. Different cloud platforms will have advantages in different areas as well. And seeing more openness and initiatives like the open supply chain across clouds, I think is to the benefit of the market. So I agree with Kelly's point. It's not like I need to have everything within a particular set of walls. Those walls are being removed.
We have another attendee question. Can you please talk a bit about unique customizations? For example, we allow customers to send items back for repair during the warranty period. None of the out-of-the-box solutions does offering for service and repair. Any thoughts?
So I'll take a stab at this one first. I think, right, service and repair are really post-order customizations. And part of the power of cloud native SaaS, in my opinion, at least the current state of it, is that it's extensible, right? So you're not getting an opinion. That means that, part of the tooling that you have is the ability to, create your own object or construct, and repair could be that. So how you attach a repair, right, to an order as a piece of data that flows through various systems and events happen, right? You have to think about it within that construct to say, more likely than not, the question here is how. How will you construct what you need to get what you want out of it? It is no longer whether you can. I guarantee you that one way or another, right, you will be able to make that happen. Whatever service and repair means to you, right, within commercetools, placing the order and, the OMS taking that and doing something with it for fulfillment and bringing it back, you can integrate and coordinate all of those things to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the specific use case, I think you're absolutely right, but it raises kind of a more fundamental question, which is about, what capability do I get out of the box, right? Which is a very valid question, and what capability am I able to achieve? Now, out of the box versus able to achieve historically was huge amounts of customization. I had to go and hack everything apart, or I had to build it all from scratch. Kelly made a point earlier about the building blocks, and this applies as much to OMS as it does to commerce, as it does to service, as it does to every other aspect. Is take the 80% of that returns process that is common with a t-shirt vendor, with a sneaker vendor, whereas the repair and service aspect is unique to that business or unique to that category. Take the 80% that's common and then build quickly the 20% that's unique to that use case. So I think it kind of blurs that boundary between what's out the box, or do I have to build it custom? And you actually get a combination of those two things, which leads to a far faster time to market. So the question itself, I think, is a very valid one and unique to that business. And I think you absolutely can execute against that. I don't see that would be a challenge to achieve, but fundamentally it's about how you approach solving these problems.
So maybe it's valuable if both of you could say a little bit about how each of your systems are extensible. How do you open that up, right, to a customer that is looking to do something special?
Sure, I'll go first. You can extend our data model very easily, and you can even have custom objects. But then I think the real value of our platform is to extend and customize functionality in commercetools. You inject events. You inject functions, or you can execute functions in response to events. So basically everything that happens in our world, we'll throw it out as an event to the hub sub queue of your choice. You can then write a Lambda function or a Google Cloud function or an Azure function to do something with that. So for anything asynchronous, you're covered there. For anything synchronous, you can define a function and then inject it into our platform synchronously. And we'll call back to it. And I'll give you an example. In Germany, it's a federal law, and I didn't know this, but in Germany, it's a federal law that you can only buy 6 cases of beer in one shopping cart transaction, which I'm sure there's a reason for that, but we have a lot of grocery stores in Germany who use our platform, like grocery chains. So they just write a function. All the function does is check how many cases of beer you have. And if it's too many, it'll throw an error and say, hey, you can't do that. And then if it's something that's truly custom, like let's say you have a really unique loyalty program, right? You can just build that as a standalone microservice, pick the paths of your choice, whether it's Cloud Run or whatever it is, right? We don't really care. But go build that, expose that API, and then that's consumed alongside us. So you call to us for commerce, and then you call to your own custom APIs for anything else.
I think from Fluent's point of view, we've internalized some of the same principles of headless commerce, and we've separated the core platform layer, which contains the data model, the orchestration platform, and so forth, and then expose through the SDK and some business tooling the ability to take what are commonly seen as workflows within the platform. So buy online, pick up in store workflow, a buy online, return in store workflow, a store fulfillment workflow. So some of the common functions that the order management performs, and we provide a standard flow. And this is one of the benefits of multi-tenant SaaS, in that we can take the learnings from many years of delivering these and deliver some standard workflows, but then give business users the ability to go and configure and control those and make those unique to a particular business. But in terms of extensibility, provide an SDK, and Kelly's more technical than I, so he explained it better. So I won't seek to say the same thing as he did, but we take the same approach. That ability to call into the platform, to send events out from the platform, to get a request response from another system is supported and is incredibly important. And the way in which we choose to do that is through webhooks and the use of GraphQL APIs, which I know, Kelly, you're particularly passionate about. You're authored on the subject. So that standardization of the approach, I think, makes it easier for developers. You don't have to be super specialized in Fluent, but more commonly available technologies and approaches like GraphQL.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could go back in time, I would actually rename Mach to Mach G, or I'd have to figure it out, but I'd have to get the G in there somehow. I don't know how.
There's still time.
It wouldn't be quite as catchy though. But for those of you who don't know, GraphQL is a query language for APIs. And what you can do is you can define one GraphQL layer in front of all of your APIs, all of your sources of data. And then as a client, and in this case, the client would be a mobile app, or it could be a kiosk, it could be a desktop website, it could be anything, that will then call to GraphQL and say, all right, I'm rendering a product detail page. To render this page, I need a product, whose ID is X, and I need its display name, I need its media, I need its price, I need its inventory, I need its reviews, and you can go and exactly retrieve what you need. And then what happens with GraphQL is it'll call to the server side. That GraphQL server will then call all the APIs with zero latency, because you're already, there's no latency involved there. And then it'll assemble the response back to you just perfectly. So you get exactly what you need with one API call, with one GraphQL call. So it's a really seamless way of retrieving data. You can also use it to change data through GraphQL mutations. We at commercetools have supported it for years, since about 2016 or so. And then the big tech giants all support it as well. So Facebook uses GraphQL. They invented it, actually. Twitter uses it. New York Times uses it. A lot of big organizations out there really support it. So it's been great. And I know, Fluent is a big supporter. I know Valtech is as well. So we very much appreciate that. So how much are you seeing GraphQL actually being used out there? And what's the adoption rate been? Is it pretty recent?
Jamie or me?
For me, or
let's fight over this one.
While we support it, we're not doing that for kind of theoretical principles. It's more efficient. So bit like the developer experience that Mihaela was asking about earlier, we have internalized that, right? So we use GraphQL internally. So our applications or modules, the UIs for OMS, utilize GraphQL to call our core platform, because that was our most efficient way of building applications. REST has a great deal of strength and ought not to be dismissed, but giving developers flexibility to use GraphQL internally really solidified its use within our business. So how often do I see it being used? Everywhere Fluent's being used, because it is the best way to extend, to be able to work with Fluent and to be able to extend it. So it has absolutely hugely improved the flexibility and the speed at which our partners and clients can adapt Fluent in their use. So it's going nowhere from our point of view. It's been a massive step change forward from our purely REST heritage.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're on the cusp of a really massive adoption of this, and certainly we're pushing it as a best practice standard. You know, there are other things to say about it, right? Especially when we talk about how we need to maybe translate or combine data from certain systems, especially when you look at a potential migration path for any particular organization. And it can also be leveraged in migration scenarios to make the ease, all right, off of the old system a little bit more consumable, so to speak, to where you don't have to change, right, so much of the foundation at the same time to get, you know, quick wins for the customer interface.
And we had another question come through in the Q&A, which I'd like to pose to all of you. In a multi-tenant environment, will the customizations from one client be available for others to use?
Short answer, no. So as a customer, as a client, and it works the same way with Fluent, you go off and you have your own AWS or GCP project, right? Your own billing account, your own everything. That's where all of your extensions and customizations live. We as the commerce platform are offering APIs, GraphQL, that you call, and then you can inject functions into us as well. But there's no separate, there's no sharing of customizations or extensions. Those extensions and customizations are entirely yours. You build them, you run them, you manage them, completely your life cycle. You pay for hosting them and running them. You know, if you keep them up and running, you know, like they're your responsibility, basically. We as a vendor are offering up APIs, GraphQL, and events. So there's a nice clear delineation there. Anything you want to add there, either of you?
Can I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate here with you on product development. So there may be a tipping point though, right? And where do both of you as vendors in the space, where does it turn to that you see an ask, you know, 10 times, 100 times from, you know, various clients, and that ask now is, you know, valuable enough or worthy enough to be integrated as a standard feature within the platform? I'm sure that does happen, right? And what is the process via which you do accept new features into the platform from client feedback?
Yeah, I think it's the critical role of client success and product management to engage often with a broad range of our clients and partners to solicit that feedback. Because to Kelly's point about building blocks and the I guess the delineation between what the vendor supports and where you're invited to make customizations, it's about that communication. So we absolutely want to deliver more and more capability as a common supported function within the Fluent platform. So there's growth in value so that our clients see more and more coming from Fluent. So the one-off customizations, I think are as Kelly described, that there is a bit of a kind of gray area in Fluent, and less of a clear line, let's say, in that within the Fluent platform, there's a core that we manage that nobody else gets to touch. There's a extension layer which has our workflows in, which you're free to customize, and actually you can inject new rules into those workflows, and those will be hosted and managed by us, subject to the parameters of the platform. And then of course there's the functions and the extensions that you host and run yourself, so that in every project there's a combination of those things. If we don't communicate and if we don't have a process outside of the technology, we get into concerns over IP. So if somebody has built something, we don't, and I'll be very clear about this, we don't have the right to, nor do we want to, adopt that into the platform. So it's far better for us to be consulting frequently and understanding the requirements of the market in advance of them being built, so that we can say, actually, you don't need to do that on your own. We'll invest in building that and supporting it. We'll invest in that as the development of our platform. So there's no getting away from the human interaction and solicitation of feedback in order for us to be able to do that.
Wonderful. So in terms of an investment, right, in business function, I think, right, what we're witnessing a little bit here is commoditization of the commerce platforms. Kelly, what is it that you're seeing in the marketplace?
I'm seeing, and we are actively pushing the market to commoditize commerce. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And if you look back at the history of commerce platforms, you used to have Intershop and Broadvision and Webster Commerce and all of these old school platforms. And to install them and run them and manage them, you needed very, very, very specialized people, as we talked about before. And now with commerce platforms like commercetools, for example, we have nice, clean, easy to consume APIs and events, really simple. And I see the same thing with like load balancers, right? It wasn't that long ago, you had to shell out $1 million for an F5 hardware load balancer or NetScaler, and you had to get their professional services people to run and install it and manage it. And when you have software or hardware for that matter, that is so difficult and expensive to use, you limit your TAM, your total addressable market, because only a few people out there can afford to spend on something like that. It becomes really prohibitive. And now if we look at load balancers, for example, you can get any number one of 1,000 load balancers off the shelf or in Google Cloud or AWS or whatever it happens to be. It's now as simple as ticking a checkbox. And in most cases, that load balancer is completely free. So there's a consolidation that's happened. There are a few of them that are doing really well. And it's a commodity, and commodities can be valuable. I mean, oil's a commodity, right? Some of the richest countries in the world are backed by oil reserves, right? So commodity isn't bad, so long as you're one of those few vendors who ends up being the commoditized vendor that everybody is using. And that allows the market to get bigger because more and more people can consume your functionality. So I think that's good. And I have actively been trying to get our market more commoditized. And I don't think people quite understand it yet, but I think it's a good thing.
And what about you, Jamie? I think, I don't know that everyone is rushing to commoditize OMS yet, right? Because it's quite complex and you need to do it very well. Are you seeing the same thing?
Well, I'd like to think so, because historically, and I think commoditization comes with mass adoption, right? So it becomes easier to commoditize something where there's a broad level of understanding of what is necessary in order for that commodity to perform its function. Order management historically, I think, has been somewhat more niche than commerce. So it will be trailing commerce in its commoditization. However, that's changed. We've moved into a much more sophisticated commerce environment. There's a much wider range of demand channels. We talk kiosks, mobile apps, commerce platforms, in-car purchasing systems, and there's a much more diverse range of supply side options, fulfilling from stores, direct from manufacturers, manufactured on demand, products assembled with service. That complexity now exposes itself in a much wider number of businesses. So where order management historically maybe had been seen as a little bit more niche, I think is far more widely required in order to profitably execute those complex business models. So one, more relevance, more regularly required, I think drives us towards a wider understanding of the space. That then leads to commoditization. And I think that we should all be in the technology sphere driving towards delivering the commonly required capability in inverted commas out of the box. We should be, as technology community, providing solutions that do all of that, tick all of those boxes. We shouldn't need RFPs anymore to say, can you do these 900 things? We should tick all those boxes, commoditizing the space, and then we should trade and we should compete with each other, and there should be multiple options for clients, and we should compete on service, and we should compete on economics, and we should compete on ease of use, as opposed to who can tick as many of the boxes on an RFP. So I think that then provides a baseline of platform that folks can innovate on top of. That's where I see OMS going. That's where we're driving towards. So I don't think we're quite at commodity yet. There are standardized requirements which are yet to normalize, but we're certainly heading in that direction.
Yeah, it's going to be a few more years yet.
I was going to say, I don't know anything about 900 question RFPs. Mine are only 10 or 20. So lots of different components, right? Truly in the market right now. And in terms of, stitching it all together and, recognizing the value, I think all the vendors also have to recognize that on the commodity level, especially when you get to that phase, there are still risks and benefits, right, to each platform. And, stitching it all together requires some base knowledge, right? So we have strong partnerships with commercetools and Fluent, and that means something. So we can be very agnostic about what the value is for any particular client. None of them are going to be the same, especially in Composable, right? It is highly complex on, matching the client needs and expectations to the capabilities of the platforms, because they're not all truly created equal. They may have, niche features that align better with a client versus another. So I think these are systems that really allow you to make important decisions very fast. And in terms of focus and specialization, you want to work with somebody, whether that's internal or external, that is comfortable in, thinking conceptually in such a distributed manner, and that thinks about integration and that thinks about speed and agility all the time. And, you can really play a wonderful subject matter expert role, right, on the partnership level and the service delivery and the integration and everything that it entails.
So
I very much appreciate having an architect involved in the process of designing and building a house. I wouldn't want the supplier of any of the products, which is super important in the building of that house, to be the ones defining how it's all put together and taking responsibility for it. I think that's a very important role.
And that's a great analogy.
I think we have time for one more question. Question from the audience. How do you control the cloud functions developed and injected by third parties into your platform in terms of data compliance? Is there any sort of certification that one needs to go through in order to plug into the platform?
I could take that one. It's not, it is an injection, but it's not. So what we'll do is at multiple points during the API call, we will call out to the function of your choice with the data that's either coming into the API or going out of the API, if that makes sense. So if you're trying to add something to the shopping cart, for example, that's a JSON object. You're posting it there and you're saying, hey, the cart API, I'm adding this to my shopping cart. You can basically register a function, and you can say before the call is actually sent to the server, send that entire object out to this function to do something. So it is an injection because you're able to inject custom functionality, right? You can change that JSON object before it hits our server, but it's not you're not running the function in our environment per se. It's still running in the customer's environment. It gets complicated quickly. If you go to docs.commercetools.com, we have some beautiful documentation on how this stuff all works. It is a paradigm shift, but it's so much better. Trust me.
I think there is and Mihaela, you touched on it before, translation of data between systems as well, right? Maybe not quite at the level that Kelly described, but there is work ongoing within the Alliance to talk about technical specifications, technical standardization, and data models. So that's an area that, whether it's certified or not, is a common understanding of the way in which these systems operate together, and that's work that I think is the responsibility of the vendors to push out, and certifications are probably more along kind of principle levels.
And I think what I want to remind people is that, there is likely a contractual expectation for the type of data that these vendors and systems expect, right, within the scope of their operations. You are using these tools to build your own system, essentially, right? So the compliance in terms of, right, the functions that you're utilizing, this isn't a quote unquote third party, right? You are interacting with an expected set of data that you are, maybe tying on top of an order that is custom. And I think contractually, like there's an expectation for the level of sensitivity that data will have, but you are the one creating that solution. And it's not some other magical third party that is truly going to inject that data. You're in full control of the integration, which means, I think you would be very, very well aware of the data that's going to flow through.
All right, I don't think we have any other questions. I know we're getting up on time, so I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you to each of our speakers, really fantastic discussion. If there are any other questions that do come up, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be more than happy to answer them. So thank you all. Thank you again, Jamie, Kelly, Mihaela, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good one. Bye.